So hello again, everyone. I am Martha Greenway, and I have been working with CRA along with my colleague Yanika Daniels for, about the last year or so on this strategic planning effort. And yesterday, if you went to yesterday's session, we shared a summary of our analysis findings and reviewed the strategic plan content. We are not going to review that again today, but instead we're going to jump right into talking about the community's input in terms of the priorities for areas that should be implemented first and critical factors to be considered in that implementation. And I'm going to share just a few slides to highlight those findings, and then we will be moving into breakout groups with a facilitator so that we can have a deeper conversation about those findings and about the community's ideas. So I'll repeat that instruction at the end of this little presentation because I see that there are a number of people still in the process of joining the room. So I am going to start by sharing a presentation, which is open on my computer, but isn't showing at the moment. There it is. All right, so the first thing I want to just review with everyone are the degree of participation we had in our thought exchange, which as a reminder, we ran between yesterday's conversation and this morning. I want to congratulate the 6 participants who managed to get their input in between 11:55 and 12 o'clock, which I will point out is 25 minutes after we said it was going to close, but we're glad to have a kind of a rush at the end. We ended up with 127 people participating in the thought exchange. And as you can see, based on our little dashboard here, we had 94 thoughts or ideas entered, almost 2,300 ratings of those ideas. So we had 50 people share thoughts, 73 people rate thoughts, and the remainder of the 127 people responded to the survey questions that were asked. And so when we look at our participants in the thought exchange, we do just want to do a quick review of the distribution of those folks. So 84% of the people were not board members, 79% were not on a CRA committee, so it is broadly representative of the general membership. And then when we look at our primary organizational affiliations, it really matches up pretty closely with the conference participation. So about 82% college university, 11% industry, and then you can see much smaller percentages in the other categories. So the next thing that I would like to speak to are the priorities for implementation, where we ask people to select from all of the objectives in the strategic plan and identify their first choice and their second choice. And so in order to ease interpretation of this information, what we've done is we have taken any objective where 10% or more of the respondents said it was either their first choice or their second choice. And so what you see on this chart are all the objectives, again, where 10% identified it as either their first or second choice to work on immediately, which is a little different than saying it's the most important. This is really a sense of urgency here. And so the item that comes up with the most overall ratings as either first or second is establish a focus on socially responsible computing, which, while it got slightly more first priority ratings, is actually tied overall with the second one to broaden the diversity of thought and demographics in computing research. And then the third item on the list actually got the most responses as a first choice to influence policy decisions that affect the computing research community. Then we have kind of a drop-off and another set of 3 that are fairly close. Increase engagement of CRA member organizations and computing researchers. Enhance understanding of the positive impact of computing research on society. And establish a transparent framework for assessment and selection of activities. So we're going to provide this slide again when we get into the breakout room. And we're going to ask if people will please expand on why you perceive that one of these objectives or more are the most critical ones to work on immediately. But an interesting array of items here that people see as the most essential to start with. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to go actually share interactively in the thought exchange at this point. So let me talk a little bit about how we analyze the responses to this question of, as CRA implements this strategic plan, what factors will be critical to address in order to ensure successful implementation? So in the system, items were rated on a scale of 1 to 5. We then went through the individual thoughts, taking anyone that received a rating overall of 3.7 out of 5 or higher, which actually generated a list that were the top 48 of 95 comments. And then we categorized them into similar themes. The system then, once a category is created, it recalculates the average rating based upon the number of respondents and ratings per item. And so I am going to quickly review this and highlight the actual comments within each one. So the top category of thoughts was around this issue of transparency. And in this category, you'll see there were 4 thoughts with a total score of 4.2. These are the ideas that were grouped. Ensuring transparency within CRA and inclusion of a diverse set of institution and researchers. So this one dips a little bit into the next category, which is inclusion. But we see here comments such as create transparent opportunities to participate, not keep the governance in the hands of a few departments, transparency, and transparency in decision making. We need to build trust with all stakeholders, and showing processes with transparency will help build that trust. So this group of categories was the most highly rated category of items. The second group, which actually gets the highest count for number of ideas, was inclusive engagement. And overall, these ideas were rated 4.1 out of 5. Now, I'm not going to read all these 19, but they are similar in content. So inclusion of faculty and students from a range of computer science academic communities, inclusive models and examples for others. All faculty and students should be able to see themselves. Involvement of a diverse set of departments, universities, and not just the top few elite state flagship universities. And so I want to point out that this notion of inclusive engagement actually has 2 dimensions as we review the comments. One dimension is the types of organizations that are engaged and have influence, and the perception that it is a limited set of types of computing research institutions that have that opportunity, and that the breadth of institutions that really are engaged in the work needs to be expanded. And then secondly, that within the organizations that are engaged, a deeper level of participation needs to be enabled so that faculty and staff are also invited, and particularly that we increase the diversity among those who are participating. So comments ensure computing people in all demographics and areas have the opportunities. CRA seems to be an elite organization. Need to reach out to all research universities, must have representations from a variety of institutions, seek input from members on barriers to participation. So you can see the types of commentary that are popping up in this category. And again, both broader in terms of institutional representation, academic units, industry and government, but also deeper participation within the computing research organizations of different types of people and more diverse people. The third category is science-driven public policy. So advocating for science data experience, not being concerned that the right point of view may be viewed as partisan by some, collaborations with other organizations as you do that work. A computing research focus. So this was only one idea, but it got a score of 4. This notion that CRA needs to maintain its focus on computing-related research, that it's the only organization that's in the computing research space and needs to maintain that. A number of comments about the need to prioritize among the initiatives. Looks like a lot of things. Pick your battles, have priorities. So interestingly, in addition to the notion that computing research needs to be central in terms of the role of the organization, also a recognition here that the organization needs to have an interdisciplinary approach, a concern that computing is going to become a technique and not a broad intersecting discipline, that other organizations need to be involved, so that you need to have, as this says, interdisciplinary and core research. Larger macro issues, and so this is the notion that CRA should focus on issues where individual organizations are less likely to have influence, such as public policy and overall societal awareness. Measures of success is essentially that. There needs to be ways to measure the achievement of the strategic plan, defining the metrics. Social impact, so this notion that having socially responsible computing research also enhances the positive impact, looking at academic partnerships across disciplines to talk about social responsibility, and being a vehicle, promoting computing research as a vehicle for tackling societal challenges. Finally, this notion of addressing education, which has continued to be a point of dialogue both with the board and the committee, but keeping in mind that academia, while it does research, that the educational component of academia is also critical to the members. And then finally, this notion that the initiatives and the work has to be mapped with the committee work and ensure that there's available bandwidth, but also that there's clarity on who is going to assume responsibility for the work. So these are the major categories of ideas that emerged when we looked at the most highly rated thoughts that were provided by the respondents. And so at this point, what we would like to do is, as was referenced before, several of you joined, David is going to randomly distribute each of you into a breakout group. That breakout group will include a facilitator from our team. I will say that not all of the facilitators have been involved in the strategic planning process up to this point. I will also say that the tool that we just shared with you is a proprietary tool from a partner. We didn't build it. So if you have detailed questions about the strategic planning process thus far, or about the mechanics of the tool, We have put an email address in here in the chat box, which we will also put in the chat box in the breakout room. You can send those questions to that email address, and we will do our best to get our answer to you. And so in the breakout groups, we're first going to ask you for comments on the objectives that were identified as those to go first and second, and further insights about why you think those are important. And then we're going to ask you for any elucidating comments on the critical factors for implementation, and also have an opportunity to talk about ways in which you think that those things can be addressed. We will run the session up until 3:30 or until you are finished with your conversations in your breakout groups. We will be taking notes of these conversations, and I do just want to close this segment by saying it's not our intention here to make decisions and to actually come to consensus about changes or next steps, but this input will be provided to the Strategic Planning Committee at their next meeting as they consider the next steps in the strategic planning process. So if there's no questions for me, I don't see anything here in the chat box. David, I think we're actually fine with our original number of breakout groups. So if you want to go ahead and distribute everyone, I'll just remind you, you'll get a pop-up button that you agree to go into a breakout room, and then you should show up with a smaller group of your colleagues. Thank you so much.